Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of our discussion on the origin of Christianity and its Afro-Asiatic roots. We are now going to look very quickly at Christianity and the ancient priesthood, which also happens to be in East Africa. The first historical root we are going to address with respect to the origins of Christianity and the origins being in East Africa, West Asia, is the fact that the Ethiopian Bible is considered the oldest and most complete Bible on earth. And so the collection that they have varies somewhat from other Bibles, but this is the scripture that they have, and it is the earliest one that is available. It's not exactly available, but it is the earliest one that is in existence. And you also have information here related to the creation of the illustrated Christian Bible that was also discovered in an Ethiopian monastery. And so some of these dynamics are dating back to the 5th century, so the 400s AD, in terms of these collections. And so just to retrace, as you recall, there is a narrative, an original narrative for Christianity in the New Testament, and there are 2 trajectories. And so you have one trajectory related to the Messiah and the house of Israel, and then you have another trajectory related to Paul and what would be considered the Gentiles. And again, as we've already reflected upon, Christianity is solidly rooted in the area that is known as Africa and Asia. And again, you can reflect on what is asserted in Hosea 13:4 with, "Yet I am the Lord thy God from the land of Egypt." Now, of course, the land of Egypt and the land of Ethiopia and the land of Libya and the land of Africa, in terms of those names, you have historically seen where sometimes those names are in different places on the map. So we do have to acknowledge that there have been points in time where Ethiopia spanned significantly more space than it currently occupies. The same thing with Egypt. So these borders, these boundaries were different. You even have Africa being in a different place on the map and not always meaning the entire continent. And so there are a few dynamics going on here that you do have to consider even when talking about this Eastern origin for Christianity. Now we're going to take a quick turn here and look at the early African priesthood, keeping in mind that earlier religious practices in terms of Christianity tended to be mixed with some of the spirituality of the people. And so whatever it is that they were practicing prior to Christianity, there was simply an incorporation of Christianity into whatever it is that they were already doing. Now remember, there's that dual purpose dynamic going on also, dual mission in terms of the New Testament. And so you do have those individuals who were considered Christians, but who were considered of the Old Testament. And then you have the additional people based upon the ministry of Paul. As was common in a number of places, you had this serpent dragon worship dynamic going on the east coast of Africa. And you also had this integration of this religious belief, this religious practice with Christianity. And so this is where some of the language comes from with respect to the idea of the king. It is related to this solar serpent worship dynamic. And then the king being seen as both earthly and divine, or royal and divine. Now, even in modern times, you can see manifestations of this integrated nature with respect to Eastern Christianity. And so this is from the Orthodox Christian Church in Ethiopia. Solar serpent worship is tied to some of the other dynamics that we have looked at in the past, including that word naga and the word negus. And then you have another word that serves as sort of the umbrella for all of this idea of solar serpent worship. And it's spelled ARWE. What's noted is that phonetically, it seems like another word that individuals in Africa have been asserting is related to the idea of Hebrew. And that word is spelled ERVERH. And I do want to point out before we go any further that this word Hebrew applies to a number of people. And one of the things that happens often is there is a conflation that goes on. And so as soon as someone hears Hebrew, they automatically jump to this house of Jacob, house of Israel dynamic. But if you look at the dynamic of being Hebrew, it did incorporate a number of cultural and ethnic groups, a number of ancestral lines. And so just be cognizant of that when you see something or hear something and they say, there's a manifestation of Hebrew presence here. It's possible that that Hebrew presence might include a number of people. Even when you were talking about the descendants of Isaac, it's possible that the descendants of Isaac that happen to be Hebrew might be Jacob or might be Esau. And so you have a couple of possibilities there. Just keep that in mind. One of the other things that we're going to quickly look at is that there is a church that was unearthed in Ethiopia that serves to rewrite the history of Christianity in Africa. And this is related to the Aksum Empire. One interesting note about early Africa revolves around a dynamic of burying entire cities under bodies of water. And so apparently there are entire cities that are buried underwater in Africa, including the east coast of Africa. And so sometimes you have the artifacts from these empires destroyed. Again, this is more of this iconoclasm going on where you have these things destroyed in hopes, the destroyer thinks, of destroying the memory, destroying the evidence of this particular cultural dynamic. You even have that going on with the Confederate statues. Many people want them destroyed, have had them destroyed, not thinking ahead to the fact that the destruction of these artifacts serves to destroy history. Because after a while, if you keep destroying these things that are seen as problematic, eventually there's no history of anything. And so you see that with these narratives about there never being slavery in America. And so what happens with that is you destroy all of these artifacts, and then that serves to undergird this rewriting of history. And so you have the same thing going on in Africa. This church was also found in the East Africa, West Asia region, specifically in East Africa. And this church is supposed to have been built or existed 4th century AD, again, the 300 time frame. And they got this idea based upon the radiocarbon dating of the artifacts that were uncovered at the church. And so again, you have this early manifestation of Christianity in East Africa prior to it being exported to Rome. And here is a depiction of one of the modern day priests. And you have additional depictions of clergy here. One other interesting point to make note of is that you do have this cultural integration going on with Ethiopia and Italy. And so it may not be so easy to disentangle those histories, those cultures. There are some similarities. And when you look at other groups also, you see these manifestations of some Iberian connection. You see that with the Fulani. You can see this with different names. And so you do see quite a bit of an Italian conflation with Ethiopian history and even genetics. And so here you see a depiction of the priesthood in modern times, and you see that there is a similarity between the clothing of the priesthood in Ethiopia and the clothing of the priesthood in Europe. The one in Ethiopia is significantly more ornate. And again, because you had the earlier bishops and priesthood situated in Africa, what you see in Rome and what you see in Europe is a replication of what was already being manifested in Africa. And here you can see the priesthood in more day-to-day clothing. And these are additional depictions of the modern priesthood. And these are additional depictions. Something else to keep in mind related to the mountain and the priesthood is that the priests serve multiple purposes. And one purpose for the Ethiopian priesthood is the monitoring and the securing of certain artifacts that are associated with the early church. So there is a security focus with respect to this particular church and this historical location. Now we're going to address the issue of iconoclasm and this destruction of artifacts and destruction of history in order to change history. And this is a commentary from a traveler indicating that Ethiopian Coptic Christianity is essentially Ethiopian. And so what you see in this particular type of Christianity is this black mother and child, or this brown mother and child, in depictions of what would be considered Mary and what would be considered Jesus. And so again, you have the people having a messianic tradition that mirrors their phenotype to a great degree. And so you see baby Jesus in these instances with a little afro. Now, there have been some debates about artifacts that are supposed to be maintained in Ethiopia. It's unclear whether some of the artifacts are actually in Ethiopia, whether they have always been in Ethiopia, whether they have been moved from Ethiopia. However, there has been a long assertion that the Ark of the Covenant has been situated in Ethiopia, if not in current times, in past times. And now we're just going to look at some of the manifestations of different phenotypes with respect to messianic narratives. And so with certain groups of people, you do see their messianic narratives having messianic depictions that look substantially the way that they look. And you see this here with the Black Madonna, or the brown mother and child with respect to Mary and Jesus. And so this does look different from what people are used to seeing when they look at standard European depictions. But again, European depictions are depicting what they consider to be their reflection. And then you have the tradition of different depictions based upon the phenotype of people in Ethiopia. Now, of course, the brown mother and child dynamic that you see in parts of Europe is likely a reflection of the older dynamics when Europe was predominantly brown. And so that's what you might be seeing there. And so the artifacts are just remaining versus being newer artifacts. And these are some additional brown depictions. And additional brown depictions. One thing that stays pretty constant, however, is the solar crown, and it's manifested in a number of ways. So that halo like look there. And now we're going to look at some maps so that you can see proximity again with respect to where things are today. And it's very interesting that Rome, as small as it is, was as active as it was and had such a far reach. Very odd, actually. Now, this is just to give you an idea of where things are supposed to be situated today. And so you can see where Turkey is situated. You can see where Israel is situated. You can see where Jordan is situated and where Egypt is situated. And so you can see that there is substantial close proximity with respect to these various places in what would be considered the Middle East or East Africa or Western Asia. But of course, at one point, these spaces were actually connected. And here you can see that Mediterranean Sea area. And if you look in the center, you see Rome, a very small place in contrast to these large spaces that are in Africa. But you also see that with the rest of Western Europe. What you see are these very small entities. In terms of the United States, the countries in Europe, in terms of size and in terms of population, they more closely resemble a state than resembling a country when contrasted again with North America. But the important point here is that small dot there that represents Rome was pretty much running everything, including the Americas. And so small place, large power. And this is just another view. And here you can see more of Africa. And again, what is noteworthy is the fact that the Christianity that was on the east coast of Africa didn't just simply travel straight across to the west coast of Africa. And so you have this going up into Europe, repackaging and coming back down as a completely different dynamic and entity. And so as we prepare to wrap this up, we are just going to recap something that we noted in the earlier discussion, and it's related to those dual purposes in the New Testament. You have two stories going on in the New Testament. You have two groups of focus in the New Testament. You have the initial messianic focus that's coming from the entity identified as the Messiah. For that entity, the focus is on the original 12 children of Jacob. That is the focus, and it is articulated by the entity understood as the Messiah. You have another dynamic, however, going on that relates to Paul, and it's the later messianic dynamic, and this would be related to grafting in, displacement, and replacement. There is quite a bit of controversy about this. There will probably not be significant resolution anytime soon, but these two issues are playing out in terms of getting a better understanding of what is going on with respect to the history of Christianity. And you have some individuals who believe that the Gentile mission is related to Esau, and the original messianic mission is related to Jacob, and not only related to Jacob, but basically limited to Jacob. And if you are just looking at the language and the actions of the entity understood as the Messiah in the New Testament, you do see that decided focus only on Jacob to the exclusion of other people. And so then you have another entity named Paul, who then serves to sort of graft in these other people, almost in a genetic maneuver. Of course, they are genetically related according to some theories, but you do have this interesting displacement, usurpation dynamic that is a part of Christianity. Paul's Christianity is about usurping. And so now we have covered the ancient priesthood and some ancillary dynamics related to iconoclasm and some other issues related to those dual missions in the New Testament. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.